As the planet gets hotter and its reservoirs shrink and its glaciers melt, people have increasingly drilled into a largely ungoverned, invisible cache of fresh water. The vast, hidden pools found deep underground. Now, a new study that examines the world's total supply of fresh water, accounting for its rivers and rain, ice and aquifers together, warns that Earth's most essential resource is quickly disappearing, signaling what the paper's authors describe as a critical, emerging threat to humanity. The landmasses of the planet are drying. In most places there is less precipitation even as moisture evaporates from the soil faster. More than anything, Earth is being slowly dehydrated by the unmitigated mining of groundwater, which underlies vast proportions of every continent. Nearly 6 billion people, or 3/4 of humanity, live in the 101 countries that the study identified as confronting a net decline in water supply, portending enormous challenges for food production and a heightening risk of conflict and instability. The research, published in the journal Science Advances, confirms not just that droughts and precipitation are growing more extreme but reports that drying regions are fast expanding. It also found that while parts of the planet are getting wetter, those areas are shrinking. The study, which excludes the ice sheets of Antarctica and Greenland, concludes not only that Earth is suffering a pandemic of continental drying in lower latitudes, but that it is the uninhibited pumping of groundwater by farmers, cities and corporations around the world that now accounts for 68% of the total loss of fresh water in those areas, which generally don't have glaciers. Groundwater is ubiquitous across the globe, but its quality and depth vary, as does its potential to be replenished by rainfall. Major groundwater basins. The deep and often high-quality aquifers underlie roughly 1/3 of the planet, including roughly half of Africa, Europe and South America. But many of those aquifers took millions of years to form and might take thousands of years to refill. Instead, a significant portion of the water taken from underground flows off the land through rivers and on to the oceans. The researchers were surprised to find that the loss of water on the continents has grown so dramatically that it has become one of the largest causes of global sea level rise. Moisture lost to evaporation and drought, plus runoff from pumped groundwater, now outpaces the melting of glaciers and the ice sheets of either Antarctica or Greenland as the largest contributor of water to the oceans. The study examines 22 years of observational data from NASA's Gravity Recovery and Climate Experiment, or GRACE, satellites, which measure changes in the mass of the Earth and have been applied to estimate its water content. Since 2002, the GRACE sensors have detected a rapid shift in water loss patterns around the planet. Around 2014, though, the pace of drying appears to have accelerated and is now growing by an area twice the size of California each year. The parts of the world drying most acutely are becoming interconnected, forming what the study's authors describe as mega regions spreading across the Earth's mid-latitudes. One of those regions covers almost the whole of Europe, the Middle East, North Africa and parts of Asia. In the American Southwest and California, groundwater loss is a familiar story. But over the past 2 decades that hotspot has also spread dramatically. It now extends through Texas and up through the southern high plains, where the Ogallala Aquifer is depended on for agriculture. And it spreads south, stretching throughout Mexico and into Central America. These regions are connected not because they rely on the same water sources. In most cases they don't. But because their populations will face the same perils of water stress. The most likely a food crisis that could ultimately displace millions of people. Research has long established that people take more water from underground when climate-driven heat and drought are at their worst, for example. During droughts, when California has enforced restrictions on delivery of surface water to its farmers, which the state regulates. The enormous agriculture enterprises that dominate the Central Valley have drilled deeper and pumped harder, depleting the aquifer, which the state regulates less precisely. Even more. For the most part, such withdrawals have remained invisible. Even with the GRACE data, scientists cannot measure the exact levels or know when an aquifer will be exhausted. But there is one foolproof sign that groundwater is disappearing. The earth above it collapses as the ground compresses like a drying sponge. The visible signs of such subsidence around the world appear to match what the GRACE data says. Mexico City is sinking as its groundwater aquifers are drained. As a large parts China, Indonesia, Spain and Iran, to name a few. A recent study by researchers at Virginia Tech in the journal Nature Cities found that 28 cities across the United States are sinking. New York, Houston and Denver among them, threatening havoc for everything from building safety to transit. In the Central Valley, the ground surface is nearly 30 vertical feet lower than it was in the first part of the 20th century. When so much water is pumped, it has to drain somewhere. Just like rivers and streams fed by rainfall, much of the used groundwater makes its way into the ocean. The study pinpoints a remarkable shift. Groundwater drilled by people, used for agriculture or urban supplies and then discarded into drainages, now contributes more water to the oceans than melting from each of the world's largest ice caps. People aren't just misusing groundwater. They are flooding their own coasts and cities in the process. That means they are also imperiling some of the world's most important food-producing lowlands in the Nile and Mekong deltas and cities from Shanghai to New York. Once in the oceans, of course, groundwater will never again be suitable for drinking and human use without expensive and energy-sucking treatment or through the natural cycle of evaporating and precipitating as rain. But even then, it may no longer fall where it is needed most. Groundwater is an intergenerational resource that is being poorly managed, if managed at all, the study states, at tremendous and exceptionally undervalued cost to future generations. That such rapid and substantial overuse of groundwater is also causing coastal flooding underscores the compounding threat of rising temperatures and aridity. It means that water scarcity and some of the most disruptive effects of climate change are now inextricably intertwined. And here, the study's authors implore leaders to find a policy solution. Improve water management and reduce groundwater use now. And the world has a tool to slow the rate of sea level rise. Fail to adjust the governance and use of groundwater around the world, and humanity risks surrendering parts of its coastal cities while pouring out finite reserves it will sorely need as the other effects of climate change take hold. If the drying continues, and the researchers warn that it is now nearly impossible to reverse on human timescales, it heralds potentially staggering and cascading risks for global order. The majority of the Earth's population lives in the 101 countries that the study identified as losing fresh water, making up not just North America, Europe and North Africa but also much of Asia, the Middle East and South America. This suggests the middle band of Earth is becoming less habitable. It also correlates closely with the places that a separate body of climate research has already identified as a shrinking environmental niche that has suited civilization for the past 6,000 years. Combined, these findings all point to the likelihood of widespread famine. the migration of large numbers of people seeking a more stable environment, and the carry-on impact of geopolitical disorder. The ramifications could be profoundly destabilizing. The massive overpumping of groundwater poses enormous risk to food production, and food is the foundation for stability. Scientists have tracked more than 1,900 incidents in which water supplies were either the casualty of, a tool for, or the cause of violence. In Syria, beginning in 2011, drought and groundwater depletion drove rural unrest that contributed to the civil war, which displaced millions of people. Water is being used as a strategic and political tool. India, for example, recently weaponized water against Pakistan. In April, following terrorist attacks in Kashmir, India suspended its participation in the Indus Waters Treaty, a river-sharing agreement between the two nuclear powers that was negotiated in 1960. The Indus system flows northwest out of Tibet into India, before turning southward into Pakistan. Pakistan has severely depleted its groundwater reserves. The region is facing one of the world's most urgent water emergencies. Allowing that water to cross the border would be prejudicial to India's interests. This case demonstrated leveraging water scarcity to win a strategic advantage. What's needed most is governance of water that recognizes it as a crucial resource that determines both sovereignty and progress. Yet there is no international framework for water management, and only a handful of countries have national water policies of their own. The United States has taken stabs at regulating its groundwater use, but in some cases those attempts appear to be failing. In 2014, California passed a Groundwater Management Act that required communities to assess their total water supply and budget its long-term use. But the act doesn't take full effect until 2040, which has allowed many groundwater districts to continue to draw heavily from aquifers even as they complete their plans to conserve those resources. Arizona pioneered groundwater regulations in 1980, creating active management areas where extraction would be limited and surface waters would be used to replenish aquifers. But it only chose to manage the water in metropolitan areas, leaving vast, unregulated swaths of the state. In recent years, Saudi investors have pumped rural water to grow feed for cattle exported back to the Arabian Peninsula, and hedge funds are competing to pump and sell water to towns near Phoenix. Meanwhile, 4 out of the original 5 active management areas are failing to meet the state's own targets. Looking out over the next century, the trends suggest the aquifers will continue to empty out. Both California and Arizona grow significant portions of America's fruits and vegetables. The United States might not have much choice but to move California's agriculture production somewhere far away and retire the land. The report's authors suggest there are ready solutions, because unlike so many aspects of the climate crisis, the human decisions that lead to the overuse of water can be speedily corrected. Agriculture, which uses the vast majority of the world's fresh water, can deploy well-tested technologies like drip irrigation that sharply cut use by as much as 50%. When California farms reduced their take of water recently, vast quantities were saved. Individuals can reduce water waste by changing simple routines, shortening showers or removing lawns. And cities can look to recycle more of the water they use. A national policy that establishes rules around water practices but also prioritizes the use of water resources for national security and a collective interest could counterbalance the forces of habit and special interests. Every country needs such a policy. But the US doesn't have a national water strategy, referring to a disjointed patchwork of state and court oversight. Data source: Shandon Perka et al. 2025. Science Advances.